This is an inner teaching, and only those who will listen with the inner ear will hear it, not the ear that is trained by slogans and programs and the noise of the age, but the ear that has learned to be still. And so I am not giving you another method to make life do your bidding. No, please hear me. I am not handing you a tool to force outcomes. This is not material media dressed in sacred robes. This is the secret of living, if only you will listen. Do you see that? Do you follow that? We are living in a loud age of manifestation, where men and women try to manufacture reality by the multiplication of words, phrase on phrase, affirmation upon affirmation, as if the infinite could be coerced by syllables. And I tell you lovingly and with authority born of long practice, there is no such thing as God being moved by noise. There isn't any. If words were the power, if phrases were the lever, then the Master would have taught his disciples a catalog of sentences to repeat morning, noon, and night. He would have said, say it 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, and you will have it. But he did not. Do you see that? Can you feel the simplicity of that? The Christ did not advertise himself. The Christ did not traffic in publicity or repetition. The Christ carried a hush around himself. A hush so deep that even when he spoke, it was as if the speaking came after something, after a realization already present, already complete, already the government upon his shoulder. In other words, the word was a sign, not a cause, a window, not the light. Truth is not shouted into being. Truth is. And when you stop trying to make it be by the force of human speech, when you stop pushing and you become receptive, then consciousness bears witness to what already is, and the witness is the power, not the syllables. Do you follow that? One declaration of truth, spoken not to convince God or change the world, but to pivot your attention off the picture, off the hypnotic screen of appearances, and then the holy task begins. The stillness, the listening, the waiting until that inner movement which is not human thought announces itself. And in that announcement the mountain moves without your hands upon it. Only a few will be willing to be without mental noise long enough to discover what actually moves mountains. Only a few will endure the quiet, because the quiet strips them of the toys of effort and the pride of doing. And so this is a narrow way and a wide blessing. Do you see that? I am asking you gently but firmly to notice the difference between using words as power and using words as a doorway into silence. Can you make that distinction right now? If you can, you are already turning. You are already withdrawing your faith from the loud age and returning it to the Christ that never advertised himself. And in that turn, a new law begins to operate, without fanfare, without strain. The realized presence preceding speech, the living God revealing itself where the clamor has ceased. Now let us be plain, for unless we lay the axe at the root, you will go on trimming leaves and wondering why the tree grows back thicker. The nature of error is summed up in one word: hypnotism, suggestion, mesmerism. Call it what you will, but recognize the principle that there is not a dozen causes and 100 effects. There is only one error, and it appears as a parade of pictures: lack today, disease tomorrow, fear on Wednesday, and even good human success on Friday. And if you chase those pictures with words, you are not touching cause, you are polishing film on a screen. Do you see that? Do you follow that? Affirmations, as commonly used, are reactions to appearances. You see a bank book and it shows emptiness, and immediately you arm yourself with sentences. You see a body and it presents a symptom, and you begin a campaign of phrases. And in that very movement, you have testified that the picture has power. You have agreed that it is presence, and you are pleading with another presence to come and fight it. And there aren't two presences. There is not God and something else. There is only God. So the moment you fight, you demonstrate that you believe in two. And that is the hypnosis itself. The proof is in the cruel arithmetic of effect treatment. You wrestle a symptom to the ground, and two more spring up in its place. You fix a relationship, and a job goes wrong. You fix the job, and the body speaks. Why? Because you have not removed the snake. You have only beaten the rug, and the snake was never in the rug. The suggestion was in thought. The picture on the road never was water. And when you threw your pails, you did not remove water. You simply tired your arms. Can you see the futility of it? Will you listen with the inner ear to the mercy in this? There is a subtlety here that only the honest will admit. Even your positive repetition may be fear in a smiling mask. A desperate attempt to hold the world together with syllables, as if by keeping the mind busy you could keep the tides from moving. And I tell you, there is no such thing as safety in noise. There isn't any. Safety is in the recognition that there is one power already present and nothing beside it. So you may say 1,000 sentences and still be pleading. And pleading is unbelief, no matter how sweet the words sound. Let us perform a sober self-audit, not to condemn, but to awaken. When you affirm, are you listening for God, or are you bargaining with life? Are you resting in the isness of God, or are you throwing phrases like sand against the wind? Are you letting truth reveal itself, or are you shouting at a mirage? And if you find that you are pleading, stop. Thank heavens you can stop, because the stopping is the beginning of dehypnotization, the end of consenting to the picture as power. In other words used to fight appearances do not reveal truth. They confirm the hypnosis. They announce that you believe in the picture. And then you ask truth to come and do battle with a dream. And truth does not fight dreams. Truth wakes you. And waking requires that the senses grow quiet so that spiritual sense may function. And then the picture that frightened you is seen for what it is, a moving shadow on a wall, without law, without substance, without cause. And so nothing to correct, nothing to push, only the presence to behold. Do you see that? Do you feel the relief of that? For in that relief the straining tongue can rest, and the inner ear may begin to hear. Now let us place the stone that the builders of noise have rejected. And this is the cornerstone, the great secret that is not a secret to the unhurried soul. There is only one presence, one power, one life, one mind, God. And because God is infinite, there is not and cannot be an opposite. There is no second presence. There is no opposing law. There is no rival life. There isn't any. Do you see that? Will you listen with the inner ear to the absoluteness of that? One presence means one presence, not one big presence and a little troublesome one. Not one high law and some nagging exceptions. And if you grant even a fingernail of second power, you have denied infinity and slipped back under the spell. Call this one by the name your heart understands. Christians may say Father, or Spirit, or the Christ within. The mystic may say awareness, or being, or the I that is before Abraham. But do not be confused by the labels, because the point is not vocabulary. The point is the oneness, the indivisible isness that leaves nothing beside it to fight, to fix, to fear, to manage. When you consent to that, really consent, not nod politely, techniques fall from your hands. Because how shall you create the omnipresent with syllables? How shall you fetch what is here? How shall you help the sun rise? Do you follow that? You do not make presence, you recognize presence. And recognition is a yielding, a bestilling, a letting the five senses stop clamoring so spiritual sense may declare, I am here. In other words, your word has no causative force in spirit. Your word at best is a witness, a sign, a lantern held up to keep yourself from tripping over the picture on the screen. But the light is not in the lantern. The light is in the sun that was shining before you lifted your arm. So truth spoken is not persuasion. It is not pleading. It is not an attempt to change God's world or correct God's child. Truth spoken is proclamation in the ancient sense, an announcement to yourself that you refuse the mesmerism of sense testimony. You refuse to confer power where there is none. You refuse the mirage, its water. The moment you need words to make it true, you have stepped out of truth and into argument. And argument is the sound of unbelief trying to talk itself into faith. Do you see why that can never touch reality? Therefore, when the picture comes, whether it wears the mask of lack, or the mask of pain, or even the mask of dazzling human good, the practice is not to assemble phrases as soldiers. The practice is to remember one power, one life, one mind, one law, and then be still. For in stillness, the hypnosis thins, and in that thinning, you do not improve a condition. You awaken to the fact that there was no condition outside of your consent to appearances. One with God is a majority, because there is no minority to oppose it. And when the heart stands there, without reaction and without the vanity of helping God, the Father's world, which never needed fixing, appears as it always has been. Do you see that? Thank heavens if you do, because from here the tongue can serve as servant, not master, and silence can reveal the power that never depended on your speech. Listen now with your inner ear, because this is the capstone, and without it, the edifice of practice will not stand. The Master did not give us slogans. He gave us a principle. I can of mine own self do nothing. And again, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. And this is not humility theater. It is not a performance of modesty to win divine favor. It is metaphysics. It is the revelation that personal sense has no power. There isn't any. Do you see that? Do you follow that? The one who walked the waves and hushed the winds and called life where a tomb had been did not operate a more muscular human mind. He had no faith in a personal self capable of doing anything. He stood absent from self and present to God. And in that absence of the personal, the presence appeared as healing, as peace, as multiplied loaves, as a law superior to sense testimony. Now, if you can read between the lines, you will feel the sword that this lays to the root of our loud culture of manifestation. Because the aim is not to make this me more potent, not to puff the balloon of personality with sacred air, not to strap affirmations onto the shoulders of self so that it can do bigger things. The aim is to discover that this me never had separate power and therefore never had the burden to carry. There is only one presence, one power, one life, one mind. And if there is only that, how shall a second little power called me come forth to manage, fix, or produce? It cannot. There is no such thing. There isn't any. The moment you set about repeating to make yourself strong, you have already conceded a second cause. And in that concession, you re-enter the hypnosis. You begin to push the dream around instead of waking. Consider the record without superstition. His words before the tomb were not incantation. Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it. Do you catch that? The utterance was for the bystanders. The realization preceded the words. The doing was the Father's. The human instrument was transparent, non-resistant. And so the works flowered of themselves out of that recognition. He did not strain. He did not visualize sinews knitting and blood cleansing. He did not debate with storms or plead with bread. He rested in the fact of one power and allowed that power to be what it eternally is. And the picture yielded as a mirage yields when the eye is sane. Not because a superior human force conquered it, but because no force was needed where there was no second presence to oppose. Do you see why this ends the fight? Then the practical pivot becomes so simple that the busy mind will despise it until it tastes its fruit. If of mine own self I do nothing, then my task is never repetition, never strain, never mental carpentry or painted imagery. My task is receptivity. My task is to speak truth once as witness to the turning, and then to listen, to be still, to let the five senses grow quiet so that spiritual sense may register the already present activity of God. In other words, the more quickly you withdraw faith from the personal, the more quickly the Father's work is revealed as the natural order, not a miracle, not an exception, but the way things are when the me is not arguing with shadows. Can you feel the relief of that? Do you understand why this ends spiritual exhaustion? Why the shoulders drop and the breath deepens? Because the universe never asked your personality to hold it together. The yoke is easy and the burden is light when the doer is God, and you are the transparency through which God beholds and God performs. Thank heavens, then, that we can stop trying to be powerful and begin consenting to power. We can stop the noise that proves our unbelief and enter the silence where the Father that dwelleth in us doeth the works. And there, without our anxiety, the works appear. Now understand why this is so desperately practical. Because the place where you lose the realization is not in some mysterious realm. It is at the doorstep of the five senses. The eyes that report separation, the ears that repeat the world's fear, the touch that measures strength against resistance, the taste and smell that calculate pleasure and pain. And as long as you let that chorus be your authority, you are hypnotized. There is no other word for it. You are accepting suggestion as fact and then trying to live inside it. Do you see that? Do you follow that? The senses present a universe of opposites, good and evil, health and sickness, abundance and lack. And if you consent to that picture, you must then fight, affirm, deny, bargain, because you have accepted two powers and you will try to get the better one to win. And there aren't two powers. There isn't any second presence here at all. So watch what happens when you set about repeating phrases. You are usually trying to drown out the noise of the senses. Yes, you are trying to shout over the testimony of the eyes and ears. And the very need to repeat tells you that the senses are still your authority. Because if you were resting in the one, what would you be trying to convince? Whom would you be talking to? Do you see the subtlety of this? Affirmations used that way glue attention to the sensory story. They keep your nose pressed to the screen. They make the picture important. And then you ask God to step into your theater and change the film. And God is not in the theater of the senses. God is the light by which reality is known, not a character on your screen. Take the ancient analogy. You are driving, and you see water shimmering across the road, and your heart jumps, and your mouth begins, dry road, dry road, dry road. And you can write it on a placard and recite it for miles. But your talking does not remove water that was never there. Do you see that? Do you understand that? The moment you recognize mirage, the spell is broken. Not because you fixed a condition, but because you withdrew belief from a picture that had no substance, and your tires find the dry pavement that was present all along. In other words, recognition dehypnotizes. Manipulation cannot. And repetition is a form of manipulation when it is used to fight what your eyes swear they see. Therefore, we come to the pivot that changes everything. The only way you can be dehypnotized is when the 5 physical senses are quiet, not destroyed, not despised, simply quiet, so that a new faculty may register, what I call spiritual sense, the capacity by which you see that which is not visible, and hear that which is not audible, and know that which the books of anatomy cannot list. Inner stillness is not a mood you put on like a soft sweater. It is a shift of instrument. It is moving from the outer microphone that catches the world's static to the inner receiver that is tuned only to God. And until that shift occurs, your words, no matter how sacred, will be answering the senses and will therefore be of the senses. So the practice, as simple as it is severe, is this. When the picture rushes in and the tongue reaches for its arsenal, stop long enough to notice that urge as the hypnosis itself. Speak truth once to pivot, one presence, one power, one life. And then refuse reaction, because reaction is the fuel of suggestion. Reaction is your consent. Reaction says, I believe what I see and I will try to change it. Be still and let the senses grow quiet. Sit in the hush where the Father announces himself, and you will discover that the pressure leaves when you are no longer pushing against it. The picture fades when you are no longer admiring or fearing it, and the road is dry without your pails, because it always was. Do you see the mercy in this? Do you feel the relief? That the doorway is silence, and the hypnotist is only the senses when you enthrone them, and that you can step down from that court this instant and listen with your inner ear. So here is the replacement method that actually works. And I call it replacement because it replaces the habit of battling pictures with the practice of beholding presence. It replaces noise with hearing. It replaces self-activity with God activity. Do you see that? Do you follow that? When the picture rushes you, symptom, bill, insult, fear, you do not arm for war. You do not reach for a bouquet of phrases. You turn, and the turn is accomplished with one statement of truth, not hurled at the condition and not bargained with God, but spoken inwardly as the pivot of attention, the acknowledgement of reality that is already here. Examples are simple and sufficient when they are anchored in the one. God is the only presence and the only power here. Or, I and the Father are one. Or, the Christ is my life. Or, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And if you listen with your inner ear, you will notice that each of these is not a plea, but a recognition. Not an argument, but a beholding. Now, the moment you have borne that witness, stop. Do you hear me? Stop. Because if you speak it twice, you are already bargaining. You are already answering the senses, and you have taken the bait. The work from that instant forward is listening. And listening is not waiting for a voice to speak syllables in your head. Listening is the relaxing of the inner fist, the loosening of the need to make something happen. It is the felt recognition that presence is here, and therefore argument can end. It is the settling that comes when the judge leaves the bench and the courtroom empties of contention. In that listening, there may be no words at all, only a dawning lightness or a simple hush, or the awareness, I am not being called to do anything. And that is the announcement of God without sound. You will ask, how do I know I am listening and not daydreaming? And I answer with something you can measure. Reaction decreases. Do you see that? The compulsion to fix, punish, manipulate the picture begins to dissolve. You are no longer rehearsing speeches. You are no longer planning 10 different moves. The emotional heat drops. Shoulders come down. Breath deepens. And a curious freedom arrives in which you can let the picture be without agreeing with it and without fearing it. That is authority. Not the noisy authority of force, but the quiet authority of one power recognized, and therefore no second power to resist or to change. Practice this in small things, so that in the louder storms you will already be trained. A bill arrives, and the old habit reaches for calculators and pleas. Instead, speak once. God is the only presence and power here. The Christ is my supply as my very life. Then stop and listen until the nervous arithmetic subsides and you can feel that you do not have to help God. And in that minute, solutions begin to appear, not as your inventions, but as what was included in presence all along. A twinge in the body speaks, and you are tempted to chant at it. Instead, I and the Father are one. And then, hush, and let the fear flush out of the system without being chased. And you will find that the body stops ruling your worship, because worship has turned to the invisible I that is your life. Do not be afraid of the emptiness. The emptiness is the womb of realization, and in that quiet, revelation rises of itself. The Father that dwelleth in me doeth the works, and you will notice that the works appear in proportion to your non-reaction. Speak truth once to pivot, then listen until the urge to do is replaced by the assurance that is, and you will have found the method that is not a method at all, but the way of Christ consciousness. Silence after recognition, and in that silence the hypnosis fades, and the Father's world stands forth. Do you see that? Will you try it now? And again, and yet again, not multiplying words, but multiplying moments of holy listening, because there, and only there, power is realized. Now I must tell you the practitioner principle in the plainest words, so that you never misunderstand it again. Healing takes place in proportion to the practitioner's reaction to the appearance. Do you hear that? Do you follow that? In other words, when you react, you have agreed with hypnosis. You have granted power to the picture, and the degree of your agreement measures the stubbornness of the appearance. When you do not react, when you refuse it authority and rest in one power, the picture has nothing to feed on, and it dissolves like a dream upon waking. There is not power in your push. There is power in your poise. There is not authority in your noise. There is authority in your non-reaction. Because non-reaction is the tacit proclamation that there is only one presence, and therefore no second to fear or to change. The great temptation is always to do something, to reach for a tool, a word, a visualization, a mental lever. And the human mind will scream that you are irresponsible if you do not take action. But the Christ way is not passivity, and it is not busy work. The Christ way is abiding. I can of mine own self do nothing. The Father that dwelleth in me doeth the works. And if the Father doeth, what does your agitation add? What does your fear correct? What can your argument improve? There isn't any improvement of God to be made. Non-reaction is not laziness. It is the deepest activity, the cessation of self, so that the One may be itself where you are. Apply this where you live so you can prove it. Fear rises like a gust, and the senses shout danger. If you grasp it and wrestle, you are believing in two powers, and you will end by fighting your own shadow. Instead, notice the gust. Refuse its authority. Return to one power. I and the Father are one. And be still. And watch how the spasm spends itself because it cannot find a believer to wear it. A symptom pricks the body, and the old habit chants at it. You have already agreed that the body is law. Drop the chant. Bear witness once to life as the only life here. Then hush. And the fear drains, and the picture loosens, not by force, but by lack of consent. A relationship inflames, and the tongue wants to prosecute. You are back in the theater. Stop. Acknowledge one mind governing both where you are. Be still until the heat leaves your chest, and then, and only then, let the next right word rise without edge. Finances threaten, and you reach for schemes. Turn. God is the substance, the source, the activity of supply. And sit in that until the mathematics of fear unclenches, and the already given channels appear of themselves. So here is your inner sequence, and it will never fail if you do not rush it. Notice the appearance. Refuse its authority. Return to one power with a single recognition. Be still, really still, until the agitation ebbs. And then, when the surface is quiet, let the next right action rise without strain, and you will find it carries its own peace as credential. Do you see why the calm is not passivity, but recognition of omnipresent government? Do you see that? Because to rest where God is all is the highest form of action, and all other action taken before that rest is only reaction. Healing appears in proportion to that inner stillness, because the stillness is your dehypnotized consent to reality. And in that consent, the Father's work, which was never absent, stands revealed. Now we come to the Master's ordering principle. And if you will listen with your inner ear, you will feel how it dissolves the last fatigue of trying. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Not earned by you, not wrestled into place by you. Added. Do you see that? Do you follow that? First means first. Consciousness before form. Realization before result. God as substance before any appearance of supply, health, guidance, companionship. And if you reverse that order, you are back in the hypnosis. You are trying to use God to get things. You are making truth a lever to pry open the mirage. And there is no such thing as a divine crowbar for dreams. There isn't any. Affirmation culture, as the world runs it, seeks things first. It points its sentences at outcomes and hopes that the syllables will fetch them. And I tell you, gently but firmly, that this reverses the Christ way. It keeps you in the theater, gazing at the screen and shouting for a better picture. The teaching is inclusion, not acquisition. The one demonstration is God realized, and all forms that belong to that realization are included as natural evidence. Do you see the mercy in that? When God is known as substance, form is expression. In the same way that when mahogany is on hand, you do not pray separately for chairs and tables and doors. You have mahogany, and so every form proper to mahogany is already included in the presence of the wood. It will show forth as needed, and not by your anxiety, but by the nature of its substance. Therefore, please accept this correction and let it set you free. You cannot demonstrate health. There isn't any such operation. You cannot demonstrate dollars. You cannot demonstrate a home. You can only make a demonstration of the presence of God, and in that presence, health, supply, home, guidance are added as the inevitable radiance of what already is. You cannot demonstrate a better mirage. You awaken from the mirage and discover the road has been dry the whole time, and the car travels on. And not because your chanting evaporated water, but because there was none to begin with. Do you understand that? So you will stop pleading for forms and begin consenting to substance. And that consent is silence after a single recognition. That consent is non-reaction rooted in one presence and one power. How will this look where you live? Very quietly and very practically. You rise and you refuse the day's marketplace to set your value. You speak truth once. I and the Father are one. God is the only presence and the only power here. And then you listen until the wanting mind eases and the rush drains, and you carry that inner altitude into your errands. As phone calls, invoices, symptoms, and invitations come and go, you do not chase one or dodge the other. You maintain the realized center where God is substance, and you watch how decisions clarify of themselves, how rightful channels of supply appear without strain, how the body's peace registers as a byproduct of not worshiping it. Outcomes arrive like birds alighting on a still branch because the branch is still. They are added in proportion to your refusal to make them the point. And in that refusal, you discover the secret prosperity of the kingdom. That nothing essential is ever absent where God is consciously known. Seek first, keep it first, and let the added things bear witness, not to your skill at getting, but to the presence that never withholds and never needs your help to be what it is. Do you see that? Thank heavens if you do, because from here the burden of outcomes falls away, and only the joy of beholding remains. Now let us anchor this in your week, so that it becomes bone of your bone, and if only you will listen and follow it simply, you will discover why I have called this the secret of all living. Do you see that? For 7 days, morning by morning, you rise, and before you look at a screen or count a number or measure a symptom, you bear witness once to truth, not to persuade God or to bargain for results, but to pivot your awareness. I and the Father are one. Or, God is the only presence and the only power here. And then you stop, and you sit very quietly, and you listen until the mental argument subsides. In other words, you wait there until the courtroom of thought empties and the judge leaves the bench. And when you sense that settling, whether it takes 5 minutes or 20, you let gratitude arise, not as payment and not as leverage, simply thank you that presence is. Thank you that I do not have to help reality be real. And you leave the chair without promising or pleading. Do you follow that? Through the day the world will call. A headline shouts, a bill arrives, a symptom flickers, a voice offends. And your old training will rush to fix, to explain, to retaliate, to chant. And right there is your midday reset. Stop. Feel the surge. Call it what it is. Hypnosis demanding reaction. And refuse to hurry. Bear witness once to one power. Then return to listening until the heat drops. Sometimes it will be 60 seconds, and sometimes longer. But do not move until the inner teacher replaces the inner prosecutor. Then act if action is given, or do nothing if nothing is given. And let peace credential your step. Do you see why this saves you hours of useless doing? You must understand refusal correctly, or you will grow hard instead of holy. Refusal is not irresponsibility. It is not denying that something seems to hurt. It is denying its claim to be a power, or a law, or a self-existent condition. I see the picture, but I do not enthrone it. I feel the wind, but I do not call it a governor. I acknowledge the mirage, and I withhold my thirst. In other words, I deny ultimacy to appearances, and I deny authority to the five senses to tell me what God is doing. There isn't any second power. There isn't any. Each evening, close the circle with a brief, honest journaling. Not to grade yourself, but to dehypnotize. Ask, where did I try to use words to control? Where did I let truth reveal itself? And let the page show you the moments you reacted and the moments you rested. And note that your real progress is measured by decreased reaction and deeper ease, not by fireworks on the screen. Do you see that? Expect resistance. The mind that loves noise will call silence unproductive, and your old nature will tell you that listening wastes time. Smile at that. Label it hypnosis, and persist until the inner teacher is felt, and you will feel him not as a new voice chattering, but as a quiet authority, a lift, a rightness that requires no argument. If you want a pattern for the 7 days, let day 1 be the introduction to the chair and the pivot. Day 2, practice refusal gently with minor irritations. Day 3, extend the midday reset to every piece of news. Day 4, lengthen the morning listening without strain. Day 5, give relationships to one mind and keep your tongue until peace speaks. Day 6, rest supply in God as substance, and watch how ingenuity relaxes. Day 7, keep a Sabbath within. Speak once at dawn, and spend the day in frequent, brief listening pauses, ending with gratitude that asks for nothing. This is disciplined listening, not repetitive speech. And as you keep it, you will find that the hypnosis thins, reaction loses its bite, and the Father's work stands revealed where argument used to stand. Speak once, listen long, refuse appearances their throne, and watch the quiet government of one power take form where you are. Do you see that? Thank heavens if you do. And so we come to the quiet power that does not advertise itself and never did. The chain now is plain if you are listening with your inner ear. Words are not the power. Appearances are suggestion. God alone is presence and power. Jesus did nothing of himself. Speak truth once as witness, then listen. And in that listening, reaction dissolves, and the Father's work is revealed. Do you see that? Do you follow that? This is the secret of all living, because it ends the ceaseless urge to prove and to push. And it ends it not by giving you a stronger human arm, but by removing the false premise that there is a human arm to strengthen. There isn't any. There is only God being God where you are. I must say to you gently that only a few will choose this, because it denies the ego its favorite costume, manager and fixer of worlds, and the ego will not surrender that role without noise. But those who do choose it find what the world cannot give, a government by inner stillness, a poise that does not rise and fall with headlines and pulses, a sufficiency that has no opposite. It is not for the crowds that want techniques to get things. It is for the few who want God and will let all else be added. Do you understand that? Now, a last check to be sure we have met. Do you see why the truest manifestation is the disappearance of the need to manifest? Why the proof is not fireworks, but the end of the itch to produce fireworks? Why the miracle is the quiet heart that has no bargain left to strike. When that hunger falls away, you do not become passive. You become transparent. And God goes about God's business without interruption. The Father that dwelleth in me doeth the works. And you behold the works as one beholds dawn. No effort, only recognition. So here is your assignment, and it is holy if you keep it. Meditate and ponder this through the week. Where in your life are you talking when you could be listening? Where are you repeating because you still believe the picture? Where can you speak truth once and then be still long enough to feel the hypnosis loosen its grip? Put that question in your pocket, for meals, for meetings, for nights when the clock glows, and let it bring you back again and again to the thunder of silence. Because there, the One announces himself, and you are safe. Go now with the benediction of quiet power, not to prove anything, not to fix anything, but to live from the Christ that needs no proving, and let the added things testify in their own time without your anxiety. May the hush of one presence go before you. May the light of one power be your rear guard. May your ears be tuned to the inner teacher, and may your reaction fall away like last season's leaves. Blessings and aloha.